This conference will now be recorded.
All right. Well, hello everybody. Welcome. Thank you for joining the latest Stratodesk Tech Talk. Today we've invited the team from Nutanix Frame or Frame. I'll let Karsten and Z determine or inform us of which way it should be pronounced or brought up. But I'm Rich Severson, the VP of Global Solutions at Stratodesk. And like I said, along with me today, we have Karsten Puls and Z from Nutanix Frame. Karsten, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. Yeah, thanks, Rich. Nice to be joining you here today. And yeah, Nutanix Frame is just fine. Frame is the product name. Nutanix is the overall company. And I'm the VP here of End User Computing at Nutanix, and have been with Nutanix now just over 3 years, and came in as part of the acquisition of Nutanix of Frame, which back then was a separate company. So as Frame, we've been around since 2013. And basically, we built a platform to let you take any Windows application and deliver it through a browser and through other devices, and that's evolved over the years, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But really excited to be here. I spent a lot of time in the VDI and the desktop virtualization space. Spent a lot of years together with you, of course, Rich, at some other companies in the past. And yeah, great to be here for this conversation.
Again, Karsten, thank you. Yeah, looking forward to working with you again, as they say, right? So, Z,
right.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate everyone. My name is Yangzi Zhao. I go by Z for short. First name is Yangzi. I've been with Nutanix now just over 2.5 years. Joined shortly after the acquisition of Frame by Nutanix. Been in this space for my entire career. Started off right out of college at Citrix. Was with them for almost a decade doing consulting for them. And then moved around to some Citrix and VMware partners. But been in UC, and it runs deep in my blood. And been leading the product management team for Frame, reporting to Karsten for the past year or so. So really looking forward to talking to you guys about hybrid work, how Stratodesk and Nutanix Frame are partnering, and answering any questions that you may have. So thanks for your time.
Yeah, absolutely. So just a quick overview of what we're going to cover today. And Karsten, I'll give you a couple more minutes if you want to talk a little bit more about Nutanix Frame, the overview and those kinds of things. But I mean, some of the things we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about the challenges of hybrid work, working from home, working from the office, people moving, people going back and forth across different places of work or locations of work, some of the little best practices, and certainly Z's going to go into some of the technical details about how Frame works and how we integrate with Frame and all those kinds of things. And part of the reason that we're doing this at Stratodesk is, we're one of the first to be quote unquote Nutanix Frame ready, having the Linux client for Frame integrated running locally inside of Stratodesk No Touch OS. What that means is that, from a Stratodesk perspective, you can have a thin client. And actually, we've got a thin client here running today. The presentation that you're actually seeing is being run on a thin client running Stratodesk OS connected to a Frame session running from Frame. I live in Nashville, and we're actually connected to a Frame session in California. So you'll get an idea of how the performance of this really works, and it's pretty amazing. It's a great solution, and to be able to provision it from No Touch Center from a central perspective, push that out to your end users, give the users the ability to connect their session and do the job. It's pretty cool. So with that, so Karsten, was there anything else you wanted to cover as far as the quick overview of Frame?
Yeah, I think we've got a couple slides, so I can maybe walk through those just to give the audience here a flavor of kind of where we came from and where we are today. So yeah, kind of at a high level, what is Frame? So we're a secure cloud platform that was really built to deliver with a core focus on apps, but also delivers desktops as well to users on any device, and we can do that through a browser, just a standard browser without any plugins or downloads, or we can do it through the Frame app for specific use cases like thin clients, and with Stratodesk No Touch OS as a great example of that. And what we did different with Frame, and when we started Frame back in 2013, I had come from a long time spent in the VDI space and the desktop virtualization space way back when we started with this back in 2000. So spent a lot of time in the on-prem world because that was really all we had as an option back then. And that was dealing with data centers and hardware and building out the entire VDI solution in an on-prem way. What we wanted to do with Frame was take a different approach and take advantage of what at the time, back in 2013, was still relatively new, this cloud concept, and deliver a service that provided the ability to run virtual desktops and virtualized apps and deliver that from the cloud. And so that was unique at the time. We were the first to be, cloud first and browser first as well. So we wanted the ability to take any application and deliver it onto any device that happened to have a browser. In many ways, taking Windows applications and converting those into web applications. And essentially, that origin in the cloud eventually led to multiple clouds. And as you see here, we support AWS, which is the first cloud way back when. This demo happens to be running in Azure, which we added back in 2015. We added GCP a few years ago as well. And then when we became part of Nutanix back in 2018, we also added the ability to deploy workloads into on-prem data centers as well. But throughout all of this, the control plane, the service itself, remains a cloud-delivered service. And what this means is that as a consumer of this service, you don't have to worry about the broker. You don't have to worry about managing the back-end infrastructure necessary for your VDI environment, or today, as we're calling it, desktop as a service. Basically, that's provided to you as part of the service. And you can choose where to orchestrate those workloads, the VMs that are indeed your desktops and the ones hosting your applications. And actually, if you can go back one, those workloads are hosted in any of these cloud regions, public cloud or on-prem. But the beauty is, since it's a centralized control plane and a multi-tenant one at that, that's delivered as a service, and your customers, your users, your end users can run in your choice of cloud and even run across multiple clouds. And in fact, that's kind of a little pie chart that we show there. It's not just sort of marketing speak that, oh, we could do multi-cloud. That's the actual split of where our customers are running workloads, and many of which run on more than one. In a lot of cases, it's both on-prem and in one or more other public clouds. So this was our approach to this whole space of desktop virtualization. Really have a cloud-first approach, especially for the broker, and then also a browser-focused approach to be very flexible, but then also have this ability to use Frame App for specific use cases like my clients, as we talked about. And the result is, so on the next slide, the result is really a platform that is much simpler to deploy and manage than traditional VDI, when kind of you had to do everything yourself purely in an on-prem environment. And it's simple not only for admins, but also simple for users, because they can access from any device or access from a lockdown device, like with no touch. It's fast, so because you don't have to install that back-end broker infrastructure or deal with that, it's a matter of signing up for a service and then literally within minutes having access to an account and being able to fire things up very, very quickly. So going from zero to a fully functioning production account is really it's a matter of minutes versus typically months when you have to put everything together yourself. And then flexibility is super important as well. And throughout our development of the Frame platform, we made sure that it can integrate with the other services that our customers use. So when it comes to identity, very easy to integrate with Active Directory, but not a requirement. So you don't have to have domain joined machines. You can run on you can use AD, or you can run with your own identity provider, such as any SAML provider like Okta or Ping Identity. So a lot of flexibility on identity. Obviously, we talked about the multi-cloud aspects. You can choose which cloud to run on. You can bring your own account, cloud account. You can use our own, and you also have flexibility on things like storage. You can use different types of cloud storage. You can choose to use your on-prem file servers. You can use file servers in the cloud. So a lot of flexibility built into the platform, so that we can easily fit into an existing environment. And then finally, it's evergreen, it's a service. So again, we're managing that back end We're making updates to it literally every week, and so you get to take advantage of new features as they're rolled out. You don't have to wait for the next big release in 6 months or a year and have to own that upgrade. It's constantly being upgraded as you go, as you would expect with any SaaS service. So that's kind of a quick snapshot of Frame overall. And I think that takes us over to Z to talk a little bit more about how we're helping this future of work in the hybrid work mode that we're all living in today.
Yeah, and it's seemingly, given the current state of affairs, seems like it's going to last even longer, that it's going to be more hybrid. Some are working from home, some are going to the office. It seems that the hybrid work from home and in office is going to be here for quite a while yet. So.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
and I'll add that I went back to the office for the first time yesterday in probably 18 months, something like that. So we have our physical offices open now, and but I'm at home today. Of course, you see I've got a virtual background here, but it's going to be hybrid for me, going off of 18 months of being at home, coming from 100% in the office. I'm going to be the perfect example of hybrid work. A few days in the office, a few days at home.
Yeah, exactly. I think the majority of Nutanix employees will be in the same boat. I'm remote. I'm in Denver, so we do have an office here, like a little satellite office here that I plan on going in every once in a while to just meet with the local account teams. But yeah, I mean, we all know that this is, as we transition hopefully to a post-pandemic world, this is kind of going to be the way most folks are going to be working, especially in the United States, as well as in Europe, and also in Asia, depending on the country. And I think that if you look at the survey, this was results from a poll conducted earlier this year by a research firm. They interviewed about 30,000 working professionals across the globe, across 30-some industries, and the results were really telling, right? So 66% of leaders polled said that their company was already considering completely redesigning their offices for a hybrid work model. 73% of employees polled said that they would want to maintain some kind of flexibility in terms of being able to work remotely. But 67% of those same employees also said that they want more in-person collaboration, right? In a post-pandemic world. So it's pretty clear that I think hybrid work models are really resonating with a lot of individuals, which makes a ton of sense. And I think we've all proven that we can work really effectively and be highly productive in a remote capacity. But we also do still miss that face-to-face interaction that you can only get in the office. Rich, next slide. But there are some challenges, to hybrid work, not just for the individual, employee, but also for IT. And when it comes to IT, there's a number of key challenges that you have to kind of work through to really help a organization, enable and support a hybrid work model. And the first and foremost is access and data security. Obviously, super important for users to be able to access the apps and data that they need to do their jobs, but I would say just as important is to ensure that the data is accessed in a secure manner, right, and not prone to data loss, especially now where users are, commuting to and from the office, bringing their laptops with them, leaving them at home, and really, introducing a lot of chance for data loss in terms of the device itself. I would say the second challenge would be around just end user device support, and this is really where solutions like NoTouch OS and Stratodesk can really help out. But when the pandemic first hit, I'm not sure if you guys remember, but there's a huge run on purchasing laptops, right, wherever you can get them. And we still have supply chain shortages today when it comes to CPU, which is affecting the auto industry, by quite a bit, GPU cards as well. And so that really just exacerbated the overall problem. And as a result, a lot of companies, either went toward a BYO model, looked for thin clients and Chromebooks and stuff like that, really just to try to get some kind of device in the hands of their employees so they can be productive at home. And I would say as organizations now shift toward more of a permanent hybrid work model, deciding on what types of devices support, and more importantly, who owns and maintains those devices is becoming a pretty big decision point here. And then I would say third would be just more of a seamless user experience. And I think this is probably one that's overlooked the most often in terms of providing that really consistent user experience, regardless of whether the user is working in the office or working from home. And certainly how companies choose to address the first couple of challenges will ultimately factor into how they address this issue. But the goal here is really to try and make user workflows and how they do their jobs independent of where they're actually physically located. And the last challenge, I would say, and these are not, all-encompassing, but these are kind of the ones that we hear most from our customers. The last challenge for IT is just ensuring that users have access to the software that they need to do their jobs. And so for companies that have pivoted strongly towards SaaS and web applications, this is certainly less of a concern but for the majority of companies out there, especially in the enterprise, that are still very dependent on Windows applications, this will ultimately determine how they address these other challenges. And especially when you talk about like a BYO model or stuff like that, you're talking about licensing of applications and software that IT may not want to give out, right, to a personal device. And that's where really things like a DaaS solution running on top of a thin client solution like Stratodesk is really going to help out for those kind of use cases. Next slide, Rich.
So, and I was going to interject real quick and go a little bit off. We talked about this momentarily at the front, Karsten, and I wanted to give you an opportunity to go back and address what we talked, right? Work from home, the hybrid, work from home better is now the thing, right? But we were talking about the collaboration tools, and you mentioned something, so I wanted to give you an opportunity to bring that back up regarding Teams integration, et cetera.
Yeah, no, that's, I mean, obviously when you're working from home, you're in an environment like this, right, doing video conferencing, and that's of course the staple of this work from home model that we're all in. And for many people, it's fine to simply use the local client that you have on whatever device you might have, and that works for some organizations. But increasingly, there's a desire to be able to put the video conferencing tool inside the VM if you're using a VDI model or a desktop as a service model, and being able to do that from within the VM so that admins can manage that and not really have to worry about the endpoint at all. We're running anything locally on the endpoint, which is typically the case when you're running in a thin client anyway. That it becomes important to have that capability within the operating system that's being delivered through VDI. And so we're happy with Frame to be rolling out a new approach to this that's in early access right now. Leverages WebRTC technology, and what it does is it lets you use whatever native video conferencing tools you want to use inside your Frame virtual machine, and it does not require any specialized or let's say optimized client on the end user side because of our use of WebRTC. And we're probably the first and only at this point to be using this technology for this purpose. And what the result is, you get really great native performance of your video and your audio because that's getting picked up directly through WebRTC from that local device. But it doesn't require any special agent other than, of course, Frame app. But it doesn't require an optimization like a specific optimization for Teams or a specific optimization for GoToMeeting or a specific optimization for Zoom. It takes those native clients, Teams as well, and places those in the VM and lets you work just as if it was running on your local machine. And that's a really nice advantage of this approach. Again, early access with Frame, but will be part of standard product available to everyone very soon.
Cool.
Yeah, and I'm actually using that technology right now. So I'm in a Frame session, and I'm sure you guys can see and hear me very clearly. But this is taking advantage of WebRTC. It's a huge, again, it really reduces simplicity, reduces complexity for our administrators because you don't have to worry about having some kind of agent or client running on the endpoint device that really helps pass the audio and video processing traffic, right, into the session. And that's kind of how other vendors will do it. They'll kind of stitch it together. But because it's all native in session, just streamlines that process, by quite a bit, especially for customers that are looking to access this through a browser. But if there's any kind of questions around how we're handling it, again, just let us know or put it in the chat.
Yeah, so I mean, and sorry, I didn't mean to jump us off track there a little bit, but I just thought it was interesting and wanted to bring that up. So I mean, and Z, you wanted to talk about what things get overlooked when people are doing, the hybrid work model, and in onboarding users when you may not have a user coming into the office, and how do you get those users used to a new work model, I guess, or a new workflow? How's that experience provided to the user? What's it feel like for the hybrid user?
Yeah, I would say, that's kind of the biggest thing. I kind of touched upon it on the previous slide, but, giving them a thin client, giving them, a lightweight device, or, you've been using BYOD, but because Frame is, browser based, we do also have that Frame app for Linux, Frame app for Windows and Mac OS, but the majority of our customers are connecting, through a browser, right? It makes it really simple to onboard new users because you don't have to worry about, imaging that laptop, out, to that user, especially in situations where you may now need to worry about bringing that laptop back if it's more of like a contractor use case. So keep everything confined to a browser experience makes it really, really straightforward. And in terms of like consistency and stuff like that, I would say that one of the key things is that when your users are at home, right, you should give them the same kind of access and authentication workflow as they would be if they're working from the office. So trying to make it really simple for the users and having that kind of consistent approach in terms of how they get access to applications and data, regardless whether they're working from home that one day or in the office the next day. And we also have things built into Frame that makes that a little bit more streamlined. So we have our own streaming gateway appliance with Frame, and that's basically providing reverse proxy for the Frame remoting protocol to give users external access into it. So we can kind of touch upon that a little bit later in terms of security, but those are a couple of points that really help streamline the overall process when you're looking at using a DaaS solution like Frame to address a hybrid work scenario.
Well, and you mentioned not sacrificing performance for the end users and those kinds of things. So how does that play in with Frame and with a thin client, let's say, and or the use of GPUs? Is it a requirement to have GPUs in the data center? What happens if there's GPUs on the device? And then is there any requirements for specific vendors? Like, does it need to be I'm not gonna, well, let's say an NVIDIA GPU, or can it be an AMD? Are any other requirements there?
Yeah, I can take that one. I mean, if we go kind of back with the history of Frame, one of the first use cases that we addressed were high-end applications that needed GPUs. And the problem was that a lot of users don't have the machine, and it's still the case today, don't have the machines necessary to run those applications. So for example, a lot of CAD applications, engineering applications, simulation applications, pretty much anything doing 3D requires a GPU. And a lot of these applications are Windows only, for example. So if you're on a Mac, like I am, or if you're on some other device or on a thin client, for example, doesn't necessarily have that horsepower, you're not going to be able to run those applications. And so that's, of course, where desktop virtualization and app virtualization come into play. And especially what's nice about running those workloads in the cloud is you do have access to a wide variety of GPUs, both from NVIDIA as well as AMD. Frame supports, we have over 90 different instance types, if I remember correctly, and 75 different cloud data centers around the world. And you can pick and choose what GPU you need for which application. And you don't even have to dedicate a user to a particular GPU all the time. You can use a GPU when you need it, and then just use a CPU-only machine if that's all you need. So we have the ability to give customers and end users that choice. And I think what's really important about this, especially when working from home, is, again, those high-end workstation machines don't tend to fit in very well in a home environment, and most people don't have those. And so connecting in from whatever they have with a BYOD device, or better, using a thin client with no completely locked down, that gives a great user experience because you're running the GPUs in the cloud and streaming those in. So, ultimately, the user experience can be as good as you need it, and that means you can address use cases from office productivity all the way up to engineers and designers and simulators that need high-end, high-performance GPUs. Again, from NVIDIA if that's required by an app, or AMD as well, which has some really nice solutions too. So don't have to sacrifice.
Yeah, I'll also add that, just in general, even for use cases that aren't specific like 3D CAD applications, we are starting to see more and more customers employ GPU or vGPU into their VDI sessions and virtual app sessions. And it's really just because, especially like for a lot more like SaaS applications, they're designed these days with an assumption that the end user has a device that has a GPU card on it, right? So we're seeing, more and more of these, especially when you're talking about like a full desktop replace use case, which is oftentimes the case when you're talking about hybrid work. The assumption is that the user has a GPU card for a lot of these applications, and the application assumes that. So in order to provide a really kind of premium experience, an experience that mimics what they would have with a physical device, having a GPU or vGPU on the instance is really going to make adoption for those users who are switching from a physical asset to a virtual environment just that much easier. So just be aware of that. The other thing I would kind of touch upon is just really just GPU availability in general in public cloud. And there is quite a bit of shortage across the board. And having AMD come into the picture and providing those AMD instances, in AWS, in Azure, that's certainly going to help, increase the availability. And with Frame, we're always looking at these new instances and adding support from as they become available. But we have a lot of our customers, when they move forward toward public cloud, they'll actually have multi-cloud just for GPU availability, right? So if they, fire up, their environment and, there's a big shortage, let's say in AWS in Northern Virginia, they can fire up in another account, in Azure, right? Or GCP to take advantage of GPU availability that may be available there. So something else to consider.
We're on-prem as well.
That's
what we see quite a bit is, especially with vGPUs, with Nutanix infrastructure. Of course, Nutanix is well known for pioneering hyperconverged infrastructure, and so that on-prem data center is still as relevant today as it ever was, because for many use cases you want to have both options, both for cost and for availability, as you mentioned. Sometimes these GPU instances can get used up in terms of too much demand. So it's great to have that on-prem option as well. And that's why we see a lot of customers doing, hybrid infrastructure as well as hybrid work. So not to overuse the term hybrid, but it gets used in a lot of ways. So including for infrastructure.
Well, and it's funny, you talk about the shortages, right? I mean, we're seeing the shortages not only from the GPU, I'm sure you guys are seeing it from the GPU perspective, but I mean, we're seeing it from the endpoint perspective, right? Where people are just clamoring to get whatever devices they can. And that's one of the benefits, again, of the Stratodesk with NoTouchOS is being able to manage those devices, have a lockdown secure OS on them, be able to manage them, control them. And it's funny that Z, you mentioned, and I'll talk about it here in just a second, eliminating VPN access. It amazes me how many people are still using VPNs. And I was actually communicating with a customer this morning. They said, well, we're going to do VPN enforcement. And I said, well, that's all well and good, but what if the device doesn't get connected to the VPN? How are you going to help them out? And they said, oh, we hadn't thought about that. Our assumption was we'd be able to reprovision them as long as they're on the VPN. I'm like, yeah, that's great, but 50% of the problems are going to be getting onto the VPN,
Yeah.
So with NoTouchOS and NoTouch Center, that's the cool part about it, is you don't have to be connected to the office at all. As long as the device is connected to NoTouch Center, you can solve the VPN and the security issues. And so, Z, I'll let you address it from your guys' perspective. But I mean, certainly that's, it's interesting that people are having to evolve to think about, the security aspects of devices that they're not used to being able to, or not used to having to manage or touch, because they don't have to worry about the machines at people's homes, just the ones in the office. Now they got these machines all over the place. So it's rather interesting. So Z, I'll let you go ahead and talk about the VPN stuff that you wanted to talk about. So.
Yeah, no, that's a great segue into it. So when you talk about a hybrid work environment, your security, your approach to security really changes, right? Your approach to security now needs to focus on the individual itself, the individual employee, individual user that's accessing. And if you talk about VPNs, VPNs were never really designed for this mass work from home, use case. If you look at the history of VPNs, they're really originally designed to have specific users accessing, sensitive data that's hosted in some kind of, headquartered data center from a remote office that may not have a dedicated connection, right? That's kind of how what it was created in the first place. And I think just based out of need and necessity, it's kind of exploded in the past, 18 months due to COVID for use. And, IT's been kind of pressured to hand out VPN access to more and more users just to let them to do their jobs. And, but at the end of the day, you can't really consider an employee's home office as secure. If they're using a personal device, you can't really consider that as secure. So, like Rich mentioned, using something like No Touch OS would really help address that. From a Frame perspective, I touched upon it earlier, is you can get rid of your VPN access, with Frame, is that we have our own built-in reverse proxy to get external users who are coming in from an external network to get into their Frame virtual desktop or virtual applications just through a proxy service, right? So you can eliminate that, VPN access, especially if you're kind of stressing your VPN at this point and you can't really add more users. That can also save on quite a bit of cost if you can avoid that major VPN upgrade process. And I would say there's also privacy concerns, right? With VPN, is that a lot of users don't really realize that, especially if they're accessing like a personal device. If you have VPN connection, there can be personal privacy concerns about what can be ultimately seen on that device, right? So another kind of consideration. But going back to just security in general, I would say that the biggest thing that you can kind of focus on is getting rid of the VPN, and also really just ensuring that you have a really solid password policy, really solid two-factor or multi-factor authentication. Having those two things in place goes a long way in terms of improving your overall security posture. When it comes to remote work, hybrid work. A recent study shows that still 80% of data breaches today are still a result of a weak password policy or stolen passwords. So that's still going to give you a long way towards there. Carson mentioned before, with Frame, we basically integrate with whatever identity provider you want, primarily SAML based. So, and then from a two-factor, multi-factor perspective, we just basically leverage whatever your configuration is, right? So if you require a secondary prompt or a multi-factor prompt, Frame will require that as well. And because in a DaaS model, in a virtual desktop and application model, right, you can obviously store your data wherever you want, right? You can store your data on the VM itself if you're doing like a persistent desktop. You can store it in some kind of cloud storage provider. But the key thing is to move the data off the end user device. So that's another thing that DaaS really allows you to do, is that it really makes your end user device a low value target. And certainly using No Touch OS, that takes it to the next level. But there's a lot of policies and configurations you can do within Frame that makes you prevent you from being able to save data onto the local device from your Frame session or vice versa. So again, making that device a low value target is also, I think, a really important aspect. And then I think the last thing I'll kind of talk about is just zero trust. And most of us probably on this call have heard of the concept of like a zero trust architecture, zero trust strategy. And really at the heart of it, zero trust is essentially a security model that assumes that there is no network edge, right, within your overall environment, which obviously becomes very relevant with hybrid work. And the assumption is that all users, regardless of the device, regardless of the location, they need to be continuously authenticated and authorized, right, and validated before granting access to specific applications, specific data repositories, so on and so forth. And I would just say that it's really wonderful in concept, but to like truly implement something like this, like end to end, it does require a number of solutions. You have to, do identity management, obviously network segmentation. Nutanix has got a great solution with Flow, security tools, policy control, real-time monitoring, CASB, right? So maybe even AI and ML solutions to do this. So you really need to have like a granular accounting of all your sensitive data and files and databases, where they're hosted, how they're hosted, and what individuals should ultimately have access to that kind of data. So implementing this kind of security model, can be pretty daunting, especially for smaller IT teams to fully implement. So, I think the advice here is to really focus on just the low-hanging fruit first, and and then that will kind of allow you to address the low-hanging fruit, address the 80% of the use cases, and then tackle the 20. And I would say beyond that, network microsegmentation is also really a big pillar of Zero Trust. So if you're looking to beyond just desktop as a service, beyond securing the endpoint, I would say the next tier that you can consider looking at is network microsegmentation, and help reduce your overall attack surface, right? Like east-west movement within the network. So I would say that is probably the next big pillar as you move toward really trying to secure your overall environment for something like hybrid work.
So, and you said the magic words, you said accounting, right? I don't want to turn this into a sales thing, because that's not what these are about. It's about the tech, and understanding the advantages and disadvantages. But at the same standpoint, we can't overlook that, everybody here is, part of EUC one way or the other, EUC, VDI, those kinds of things. And so, when you talk about cloud, when you talk about adding GPUs, et cetera, certainly then there's big costs or concerns about cost and how to leverage that. What are the advantages, disadvantages, and those kinds of things. And so, and I know, Karsten, you want to have an opportunity to talk about that and see how Frame leverages the differences there. So, what's your thoughts on that? Obviously you've been in the industry quite a while. You and I have some work history over the last, oh my God, it's been a decade already. So, but anyways, what's your thoughts on that, Karsten?
Yeah, no, look, in let's say the old days back, before the cloud, and when we were doing VDI, you really, you had one choice. You had to buy the infrastructure, and you had to always ask, well, what's your peak load going to be? And typically you're buying infrastructure for a period of 3 to 5 years. So you always try to estimate, well, okay, what is my peak need going to be in the next 3 to 5 years? And the result has typically been, in the traditional approach, is, figure out what that peak is, buy the amount of infrastructure you need for that, and then you've paid for it. And whether or not you use it or not is another story. And I've talked to so many customers over the years who've done that. And when you go and look at their actual utilization at any given time, it's much lower. And especially if you look at use cases that have seasonality. So education is a great example of that. We have a lot of customers in the education space where it's fully used during the semester, but then over the summer it goes to zero. And so now having cloud infrastructure as an option and the ability to combine the two, you can say, okay, all right, I know for steady state, it still tends to be lower cost to have the infrastructure on-prem if it's always going to get used. So the question becomes not what is your peak going to be, but it's what is your typical steady state? What is your baseline? And you can use that with on-prem infrastructure. And then the cloud is where you can go to burst or to handle seasonality or handle special projects. And you can just pay for that as you need it. And if you need it for a few hours, fine. If you need it for a few days or months, that's fine as well. You pay for it as you go. And so now having the combination of both models, you can really optimize your costs to get the best of both worlds, the best of a steady state environment with on-prem infrastructure, and then a bursting environment to pay for only what you need by using the cloud. And that's a great strategy, and it also gives IT admins so much more flexibility, and frankly, a little bit of a relief to not have to peg that number up front in terms of how much infrastructure we'll need. You have that flexibility to say, okay, I don't have to be exact, but let me get something in the ballpark for the baseline, and then allow my my cloud to cover that which I do not know, which so often if you're trying to plan for a 3 or 5 year horizon, you just don't know. And so it's a lot more assuring to know you have that cloud option to not have to figure everything out on day one.
Yeah, and then of course, I got to throw in the fact that being able to repurpose existing devices rather than throw them out, right? Because hey, this won't work with that infrastructure, it won't work with that infrastructure. Being able to have devices that have been certified with with Frame and with the Frame app and et cetera. So and so we're kind of getting close to wrapping this up a little bit. So I wanted to open it up that way. If anybody has any questions or anything, certainly for Karsten and Z. This is a great opportunity to understand how Frame works, what Frame does, inclusion with Frame and thin clients, inclusion with Frame and Stratodesk, those kinds of things. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to put them in that in the chat dialogue, you know, and we got a couple other things to cover up as we wrap up. But I mean, again, if anybody has any questions, go ahead and throw them out there. But you know, we're talking about the ability to repurpose devices, because obviously with the chip shortages, that's been issues. You know, and it's important, you know, the fact that we've taken the steps to, you know, get their frame ready certification so that we can validate with you and us as mutual vendors. And actually, I'm going to take a moment to do a little bit of shout out for Paul. Paul is actually one of our team members who's worked with Ruben directly, one of your guys' team members, as part of the testing to make sure all this works. So Paul and Ruben, you know, I know Ruben's not on here, but hey, shout out and thanks guys for the efforts that you put into this. So it's been a great team effort, I guess, if you will, on both parts. So, but anyways, so I know that there was a couple of other potential things we were talking about, maybe, you know, persistent versus non-persistent desktops and trends. I mean, Karsten, Z, you guys want to address that? Where do you see that, guys?
I mean, one way to address that is kind of a continuation on the question of cost and cost optimization. I mean, certainly there are these two models that you can use. You can use persistent desktops where each user is given their own dedicated VM, and you know, and that's theirs, and you know, you have to kind of manage that almost like it's an individual PC. Or what's really popular and what the majority of our customers use today is a non-persistent virtual machine, which is a, you know, common operating system, common set of applications, but the things that are unique to the user is stored separately in a profile. And what that means is that you can manage those, all of those VMs in your, let's say, pool, production pool of machines as one operating system. And so making updates, you make one change to your gold image and you push that out to all of your non-persistent VMs. Everybody's updated. Everybody has the benefit of the latest and greatest, which is, of course, also important from a security perspective as well. Really, the only thing you can't do in a non-persistent VM world is install your own applications and really, you know, mess with the operating system, which in most cases, admins, we don't want our users to mess with the operating system. For the same reason, it's so nice to have a thin client and a lockdown thin client OS with no touch. It's just in the name, right? No touch. It's easy to manage, but it's also, you know, don't let the users go messing things up. And so, you know, that's the ideal way to really take advantage of this technology is non-persistent desktops, tightly managed thin clients. But you know, you do have the flexibility to do persistent desktops for those use cases that really demand it, which typically are going to be things like developers who are, you know, they're wanting to install software, they're wanting to make a lot of changes, etc. But for most use cases, probably 80–90%, non-persistent is a great fit and saves you on costs because you don't need as many VMs. You only need as many as however many users are going to connect at the same time, which is often a number that's significantly less than the total number of users you have. Which, of course, if you're doing persistent desktops, you need, you know, one for every user. So that's kind of ties into the cost as well when you look at these different models.
Good. Well, interestingly enough, looks like we don't have any questions. So I'm going to give Karsten a moment to think. Z, any final points you wanted to bring up, cover off?
I'll just really quickly expound upon just like the persistent desktops piece. You know, especially when it comes to hybrid work. Like I would say, like majority of us on this call right now are probably using some kind of persistent, you know, type of device, right? So as you, especially for customers, if you're brand new to virtual desktops and virtual applications, and you are looking to deploy something like a DaaS solution, there could be a transition period where, you know, it's okay to use persistent desktops if that gets your users adoption faster, right? So that's one thing to just consider. Because a lot of, you know, especially if you're doing, you know, a work from home, hyper work type of scenario for users that are using a persistent type of, you know, physical device today, there could be that transition period, right, where you say, hey, look, it's going from a physical, you know, laptop where they have full control over that device to a non-persistent lockdown virtual desktop. That may be too much of a swing initially. So, you know, my advice there is that, you know, we have persistent desktops for a reason for those types of use cases. And if you can't quite get all the way to non-persistent desktops, it's okay to use persistent desktops, especially in the interim or for long term. It really just depends on your use case. and take advantage of that where it makes sense. I think the most important thing is you making sure your users are happy and satisfied with the environment. That's usually the biggest piece to whether you are successful with virtual apps and desktops is user adoption and satisfaction. So always keep that in mind, in the back of your head.
Yeah, as we all know, right? At the end of the day, end user computing is all about the end user experience, right? So, Karsten, any final points from your perspective?
Yeah, look, I think I can wrap up with, I've spent a long time in this space of desktop virtualization. A lot of that specifically in the thin client space as well, and I think I'm really thrilled to be here together with you, Rich, and the team as Stratodesk being the first to be frame ready. And of course, what that means is we've gone through an extensive validation of no touch together with frame. And I think when you're looking at a thin client model, it's really important to focus on the software. So often in my past, there's a lot of focus on the hardware and what can the thin client do. To a large extent, the hardware is very commoditized these days, and really what matters in the thin client deployment is the OS and the management software that manages that thin client endpoint as well. I mean, that's super critical, super important, and especially as you get to scale. And so, with no touch and Stratodesk's tools for managing those devices, it's just a great fit for a desktop virtualization and a desktop as a service solution like Frame. And we're thrilled to have Stratodesk as the first in the program and completed all the validation. And look forward to helping all of you with your desktop virtualization needs. And yeah, really appreciate you all having us on today.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And yeah, it's been a great partnership. And we do a great job at the endpoints and managing the endpoints, but at the end of the day, we've got to have something to connect to, right? So having a seamless tool. And again, I want to point out, lest everybody forget, the whole presentation you've seen today has been running on a thin client, running no touch OS through a frame session. So I mean, it's there, it works, guys. So I mean, if anybody has any questions, about Stratodesk or no touch OS or frame, feel free to let us know, reach out to us. Either team will be happy to address any questions. And Karsten, Z, thank you. It's been awesome having you guys on. And Karsten, good to see you and have a talk with you again. So
all right.
And it looks like there's no questions. So guys, appreciate it. Thanks and have a great day.
Thank you guys. Take care.
Bye.